Hi everyone, this is Striker, and welcome to a very special episode number 17 of my Redout Advanced Strategy Guide. Joining me today is one of the rising stars of Redout, one of the community's most popular streamers, and someone who is increasingly becoming a true threat on the time trial leaderboards. Please help me to welcome Zorinar. How are you doing today?
Doing all right. Have a nice little afternoon to look at some Redout stuff.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you first of all for coming onto the show. It's a real honor. Now, when we talk about Return Null, that is our track of emphasis, and it might be one that surprises some people, because it's not a track that I especially like, nor have put much time into in time trial scenarios. But it's one that you have in some ways specified as your potential first world record. So I want to ask you this first. What about Return Null intrigues you? When we look at all of the tracks in Redout, all 60, why this one? And what do you like about it from a design perspective?
It's a track that is all simplistic, right? You're looking at a track that has just some turns. It seems like there's not a whole lot going on, but it's those fine details that really make all the difference between a good time, a great time, and then even the finer details into getting that world record. So all those little minute details, I think, started to really grab me, even though it's not a track that really has a lot going for it. Like, it's not a track that I would go and say, hey guys, let's do this as a race for fun. But to grind out and to try and just perfect is definitely entertaining.
What I find about it is that the minutia of learning the boost patterns and the steering mechanics are very opaque. Now, I'll give you the contrast. If we look at a track like Hydro Thunder, it's very obvious that your first turbo boost is directly at the starting line. The second turbo boost is directly after the first right-hand turn. And basically, every moment of steering or turboing happens with a very precise approach. But in Return Null, there's a lot of variability on how you can decide to approach the starting line, how you maneuver through the turns, and when you decide to engage your turbo. So it's one that doesn't necessarily feel as rewarding for me to nail down a good lap, but it is very thoughtful in that way. So that's kind of what I've gathered from this track. Now, let's say you take a track like this, you're relatively new to Redout. What is your process when you sit down for a time trial to understand the correct strategies?
I think because I'm a bit newer, it makes me want to learn first from, if I can, someone else. So that usually might mean doing a little bit of research, seeing how other people are approaching. But otherwise, it's going to be me just kind of getting into the track, trying a few different things, honestly with a few different ships and setups, to see what works and what doesn't first, before starting to settle into what I think might be the best approach on it.
Okay, now it's funny you say that because we're using two different ships. Both ships I feel have viability in time trials, and especially in a race with more hazards and other vehicles to prevent a great time. But I think overall, the speed differential with Koningsworth is too much to overcome for the ESA, even though ESA has some very particular advantages that I want to talk about a little bit later in the track.
So at this point, how about we do this? Let's play back both of our individual laps in their entirety, and then move to the analysis tool where we can view some side-by-side comparisons. Let's take a look.
So let's do this now. Let's play through the beginning of the track. This is us preparing for the start, getting around that last turn for the setup. Now talk me through the first 8 or so seconds of this left turn into this right turn. It's a very unusual layout for a Redout track, so give me your thoughts on this.
So when we're starting to set up for the track, usually the few things that we end up doing when we consider doing time trials, we want to be able to turbo usually if we can. Obviously with this, if we turboed, we go straight into that corner and that would be pretty bad. It would be very slow. But what we also want to do here, we have this really sharp left. The best thing, anytime we have a magnetic stabilizers or MS power up, as you can see here, we are hugging that corner as close as we possibly can. And to do that, we are going to do a very slight boost to start so that it might be easier to make it. Now, what I decided to do when it comes to being after this first turn, right? So as you watch, we're going to go in, we're going to do a slight boost, and then here, I want to try and boost a little bit out of this turn, because now you're going straight again. We're kind of applying an idea that you might take from a pure race, being able to do a slight little boost, and then we're going to, again, hug the corner here. Whenever we can hug corners with magnetic stabilizers, we generally want to do that. So we're hugging that corner. And now here is that we have the difficulty of, if you look at the line that like I have on my side and that you have on your side, we always want to try and be straight. But again, we want to hug turns at the same time. And also we want to hit that little turbo boost right there, that little boost pad. So we got to get that right line to be able to hit all of those points while trying our best not to oversteer. And that makes it so difficult. And then also, we have that first turbo coming up that we want to make sure is good and clean.
As you're talking me through this, talking about that angle, there's a very distinct difference between my angle on the left and your angle on the right. Mine is much more vertical, much more up and down. You can see how your track essentially flails out to the right before going to your left straight. And in reviewing both of these identical lap times in Canovia before we started recording today, I noticed that this is where I feel I gained quite an advantage over you, and you subsequently made it up at the end of the lap. So let me play this through in real time. Watch the change in angle that you have to hit here to get back to your boosting pattern. Look how much your ship is tilted on the right. And you see how I'm much straighter on the left? So that is going to allow me to carry much more speed through the turbo boosting spot. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's something that in more of my more recent times, this time that we're looking at for me is, a couple months old now, I think. And that I've kind of noticed that that's one part that I needed to work on was, okay, I am oversteering to make myself take that first part. So, right, I go through the turn, and then as we come to that next part, again, I am maybe overcorrecting myself, or maybe I'm just not setting myself up in the right angle to be able to do just as you said, right? Take a bit more minimal turn.
And for less experienced players, where this really becomes more proficient is when you start to learn how to counter strafe. So remember the left stick, or if you're on a keyboard, your A and D keys, that's your steering, right? That's of primary importance to navigation. But cutting down the number of times that you actually steer and increasing the amount of times that you change and control your angles via strafing, that's going to make a huge difference in your ability to maintain speed and decrease time. From here, I feel like coming up into this left-hand turn after the jump, we want to be skipping this track segment here. There is no benefit that I've seen to landing there, especially if you have to decrease your speed by pitching down. But I think the biggest area that this track gets made or broken in is this upcoming left-hand turn.
Absolutely.
Now, my immediate thoughts on watching some of the return null footage on the internet was that time could be improved by landing and hugging, once again, extremely closely to that left-hand barrier. That would be the ordinary strategy with a magnetic stabilizer track, that everything is hugged closely. If you look at something like Solar Farm, there's no reason to ever flail that I've found. But I think one other element that makes return null a bit different is that we are not looking to necessarily hug everything so closely. Watch the way we approach this turn. So that was quite wide. And we then both settled independently on using a right side wall bounce. Now, when you decided on bouncing versus cutting the turn closely, what made you come to this outcome?
I think in this particular one, it's an interesting point in that here we're almost minimizing the amount of time that we're turning because we're going so quickly through it. And then using the wall bounce, we end up having a bit more speed coming out of it. Whereas, so if we hug the turn, then we are taking a lot of time to hug it. We have to basically do a U-turn almost. And that's going to slow us down significantly trying to go through there. Now, there are definitely ways you can take that turn and still be going pretty quickly. Though I find, and I think, the most consistent and easier to perform route is to go and assume you're going to take that wall bounce.
I would agree with that. Now, in most of my time trial analysis, wall bounces tend to come with a time penalty of about 0.150. It could be less, it could be more, depending on the severity or placement of the bounce. But, like you had alluded to, the speed loss has to be factored in as well. So if we gain time, or essentially increase the distance we have to travel with a wide turn, but we can do it at a much faster speed through the turn, and then especially at the exit velocity, we're going to set ourselves up much better for everything that comes ahead of us down this straightaway into the next interesting segment.
I think that there is ways we could do that better by maybe still kind of cutting it closer to the apex as we pass through to turn. But that's something that we would need to look at a bit more closely and test a bit better. As you kind of like watch us, we do have a good bit of space that's still available to us. Or at least I think I have a bit more. But we could possibly cut closer, shortening the turn with still the same wall bounce. So, little tidbit thing. So if you go back just a little bit here, and make sure you can actually see the track here. So if you see on the track as where we're going to land, you can see on the right side there are these green shapes, right? There's the green middle of the track, and these green shapes. If you're wanting to figure out how can we best take this turn, the trick is you want to land right in front of, or right for, the second green shape on the right side. So if you watch, I think I landed a little bit late, and that's what's preventing me from landing at the place I want and taking the turn as closely as I wanted. So that's just a little cue that I started to pick up, that you can land at that second little green shape, and then try your hardest to take that turn. They'll help set you up just right for it.
Can you point that out with my mouse? Can you tell me where to go?
So on the track itself.
Okay.
You see the green on the right side? Right, yeah, you're
Here?
no, on the track itself. On the track itself.
Okay.
See the little green kind of point outcroppings?
Oh, the little jagged edges here?
Yeah, those guys.
So this one.
Yeah. If you land right about there, maybe just right before it or right at the edge of it. So if you watch, see I land on it, you land actually in the spot. You can start turning right about then, about when you land, and you will be able to take that turn just about perfectly. So look at your angle compared to mine, where you landed slightly sooner. See how much you're closer than I am.
So that's advantageous to land where I did.
Correct.
Okay. And that would go against common logic of trying to increase the airtime to gain more speed. That's a little bit different. So that's a great strategy. So if we look at our positions here, we're both at the exact same spot. So let me go back a little bit, show you where I saw some of that time improvement in the beginning of my lap versus yours. So right here, I am at this particular checkpoint. This is just before the jump. And you are 4 frames behind. So that's about 0.066 of difference. Now, whether it's a factor of using a faster ship or having a slightly better angle through this turn, we end up at the same position by the time we get to here. So just something to point out. Now, I'm going to play this ahead a little bit. There's a pretty boring straightaway here, but then we have a very distinct right-hand turn into a turbo boost and a left slope. It's not going to be as evident in these videos because we use a different camera angle, but what I've found is that the primary advantage of using the ESA, aside from the increased acceleration coming off of these slow segments, is the visibility that you have coming over this hill into that straightaway. And when I was testing out Koningsworth briefly, I felt that that was a bit more obstructed. I don't think you've encountered that using this camera angle to the same degree.
No, because I use the farther back camera angle, I generally have a better view of the track most of the time. So I haven't really had that issue. But if you were to take the camera angle that Striker has, yeah, the position that the camera is behind the Koningsworth makes it hard to see.
Now from here, your turbo boost, let me just see again. I think we both boosted relatively early. Yep, we boosted at the exact same time. Most people would say, and common logic would dictate, that you would hold that turbo until your vehicle has straightened out. So why did you decide to boost so early?
So there are two reasons. The first one is that this is pretty good to be able to go ahead and get a turbo, and we're also going to end up slowing down anyways. So we are speeding through a part that is slow, and we're going through a turn where we slow down again anyways. So for the Koningsworth, we're definitely getting the most out of its turbo boost in that whole section. The second part is something that we actually don't see until later. And the second part is the last turbo boost. The fact that we take that turbo boost just slightly earlier than you think we would means that when we come through this last turn, we will be able to turbo slightly earlier here. You notice how we were able to turbo just as we come out of the turn. And that actually makes a significant difference when we're cutting towards those world record times.
That's a great point. One more thing that I want to illustrate here and why I feel that this ESA time could be improved, even if I don't decide to switch to Koningsworth. If you look at the right-hand side of your point of view here, see how close you are to that barrier? Coming over this hill, we know that we need to eventually slope to the left as we go down that straightaway. The further you are to the right when you start this segment, the easier it is to make that transition without a massive shift of steering angle. Because I didn't line that up especially well, if you look at the left as I play this in real time, watch how straight I come down that section on the left side. See how far I am to the left? And then from here, I'm stuck because I can't gradually slope any more left because I'll fall right off the track. So this was a massive oversteer for me to stay on route. What you were able to do, and you can see the difference in angle over here, you were able to very carefully glide along that left side exit. So if anyone's watching, that's the way you need to line up, is start to the right over here, and then gradually find yourself moving left where we can just avoid falling off.
Right. And the reason that you end up still having a bit of, like, we're out in the same position still, is that you still ended up closer to the left hand, like the turn itself. You hugged a turn a bit better than I did. And that does make a difference on this. And honestly, I have found it easier to do that in an ESA than a Königsworth.
Interesting. Okay. Once you cross through that turn here, coming up to the straightaway, I find that left counter strafing is a very valuable addition to your lap. So, if you review the Ghibli Advanced Strategy guide I did when I talked about counter strafing, we can bump up our speed on this long segment by about 25-35 kilometers per hour. And that's not only going to decrease our timer, but it's going to allow us to take more speed into this final right-hander. Any tips for this turn here, how players should approach it?
Well, because we're going to the left, that's going to set us up to take the turn a bit better, right? Imagine what you might think of as the kind of perfect way to take a turn, as it would be done in, say, like an F1 race, right? They're going to start outside and then try and cut it like we're trying to do here. We got to get that good counter strafe to be able to hug this turn as best we can without touching the wall, trying to be as consistent through the turn as we can. So it takes practice to be able to get as close as we're getting, but you need to be thinking is, all right, don't hit this wall because I got the turbo right soon. And it's all going to be in that big first counter strafe, and then being able to take that turn properly by then strafing into it.
Sure. Now, here's another visible example of what you were talking about before with that early turbo boost at the last spot leading to a full charge here. So watch right as we come around this right-hander, we're both fully recharged. If you had delayed that previous boost, yes, you might have been faster through the downward left slope, but now you're waiting on this final turbo, and you have nothing but a straight line ahead of you. So I think we both did a really good job of isolating that to where we can completely line up straight and fire that boost towards the finish. Would you tend to agree with that?
Absolutely. That is exactly what happened there.
You will not see this very often. An identical lap from two players across two different ships. So what I want to do now is bring us back to the beginning. Going to give you my quick thoughts in real time of how I feel this lap could be improved, and then I'll have you do the same. So just focus on the left pane of the video viewer. So I cut a little bit wide into this turn to try to maintain more speed to the start. I'm being very precise with my micro boosting and then hitting a drain right there. That turn was good, but it could be a lot better. And if you get closer to the left there, you set yourself up much more easily for that turbo. Now right here, as we talked about, it could be a lot closer to the apex while still maintaining the benefits of the wall bounce. Right here, if I hugged further to the right, it would have made this a lot better. And then from here, we have to consider that I'm only 0.2 of a second away from the world record with an off-meta ship. So I feel if I can improve those two spots and potentially change the ship with a faster top speed, I'm going to lead myself for a much better lap time. Okay, let me pass it over to you.
So sure, getting set up again. And the things I'm thinking about for improvement are going to be the section that we talked about at the start, right? This part here where I could angle myself better so I'm not having to turn as much left. Here also, I thought of something where if I land slightly earlier, I can take that turn closer, like we talked about. And then here, again, it's the tiny thing of just getting a little bit closer to that edge and finishing strong here, maintaining a close turn and turboing right to the end. So tightening up a few of my turns, setting myself up a better angle at the beginning portion is probably going to lead me to have time that I'm wanting.
Sounds good. So that is Return Null. And I think this sets up a very interesting contest between us now. We had a bit of a gentleman's agreement not to try and break these times before we recorded this episode. I thought having two identical laps would make for quite an interesting comparison, but now all bets are off. So I wish you luck in getting that first world record. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this episode. And I want to especially thank you, Zorinar, for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me, and good luck to you.
Okay, see you all later.